the explanation about the
yes,
project?
She did.
Okay,
yes,
okay,
yes,
because
she did. Yeah, she sent me that letter.
So you know a bit what the project is about. We're trying to establish an oral history of Queensland post-war
architecture. It's a good time to do it, isn't it, really?
It's a lot easier when people can still remember these things.
Well, it makes me feel old. I tell you, to be part of oral history, that's a concern.
So basically what we'll do is we'll go over the questions, but I'm sure Robert has added a few, and I also added a few to the standard
That's
list.
fine,
So
and I can't answer all of these anyway.
Okay. So for the tape, I should say that it's the 1st of October 2012. We're interviewing Helen Mills, and here with me is Robert Riddel, and I'm Janina, and we're at the School of Architecture in St. Lucia. Good.
And it's the Queen's birthday as well.
The second one.
The second one for the year. That's right. So no wonder we're confused.
Yes. So I think maybe the first thing we'll ask you is why did you decide to study architecture originally?
When? This is a long story, and I'm sure you don't want it long. But when I was at school, I wanted to do drawing, drafting, that kind of thing, and but that sort of thing was not open to a woman. It wasn't the sort of thing you did. So I left school, started to work in a bank, and but I kept this desire to do this, so I continually applied for positions, trying to do drafting work, but discovered that nobody would employ a woman. But the only people that did that sort of work were the government, and the government would not employ a woman in anything except nursing, school teaching, a stenographer. I kept trying. The only place that had what they call traces was the council, Brisbane City Council, and they would not employ anybody without experience. And that went on for a few years, and I kept getting restless. So I decided to get some experience, and the way to do that was to study architecture, which I could do. I'd only done junior, but I was able to do the first 3 years at the technical college at that stage without matriculation, and at night time, although I had to get a job in architecture, I think, by the end of that time. So I started the course. That's how it all started.
Was it QIT, the diploma course?
Yeah, Central Technical College it was then, and that was 3 years. Then and in that time I did get a job, which is another part of the story, but I stopped after 3 years. Then I did a year of matriculation because I had to do that then. There was a thing called the Certificate of Architecture then.
Yes.
It didn't mean much. It didn't give anybody much of a qualification or anything, but by that time I was involved. So I kept on going. I matriculated. Then I did the next 3 years here for the diploma in architecture. And as I say, I did get a job. I got a job as a draftsman at Shell first for a little while, and then, it must have been about 18 months, something. I got the job then at Blyjas at Bretnor and Partners. And so that's how it started.
Where did the fascination for drawing
I don't know. I was keen on art, but I was never a good sketcher, that kind of thing. I've taken that up in my retirement. But it was more geometrical drawing that I was interested in. And it was because I wanted to do something in that field when I left school. But it wasn't open to me that then I was involved. I got involved in studying architecture. So and then I was hooked, I suppose.
But there's a big difference between drawings and buildings.
Oh yes, yes, I know. Yeah.
When did you make that leap?
I think I think it was a natural kind of thing during the course. I love buildings now still, And there's a bit of a joke. I do some watercolour painting now, and they always have, particularly an old church from England. I've spent a lot of time in England, so I love buildings. But when that started, I think it started through the study of architecture. That's all I can think. I really can't answer it otherwise.
There were no family members or
no family members, nothing. No family members. No architect in the family. Nothing like that.
Okay.
So.
And what about when you saw the modern architecture that was happening around places like Surfers Paradise and to a lesser extent in Brisbane, but I mean it was happening, and that certainly was something I noticed. Did you notice that in the same way? And get excited about it, or was it older buildings that you responded to?
I got excited by modern architecture, but I would have to say now, I was going to say I would have to say now it's older buildings but overseas stuff, but I would have to say that both excite me now. We have some beautiful older buildings in Queensland, particularly residential buildings. Certainly overseas, I just love I love the cathedrals, but I also love the simple village churches that have been there for 1,000 years and are half falling apart. Absolutely love the setting, and I think that's one of the things. I'm rambling on a bit, but that's one of the things about architecture is the setting as well. It's not just the building; it's the setting that the building is in. So there are some beautiful old buildings. I think the period that you have here is not the period of the most beautiful buildings. I think and as I say, I'm out of touch, and then I've been back from overseas for 11 years. When I came back, I think I have seen, and I couldn't tell you who designed them even, some beautiful new buildings. There is now a style of architecture that I think in this period we were searching for. And in some cases it's been found, in some cases it hasn't been found. I don't know whether that, but the surface part, I don't sort of remember thinking along those lines. I think here we were very much, because this was Brisbane, and we looked to the south. There was a bit going on up north. We looked to the south, and we looked overseas, and they were the places we looked.
Well, what about the people who taught you? What do you remember of them?
They were remarkable people that they sort of put up with me. There were only a couple of women in the class.
Some before you, or were you the first?
I think there was maybe there was somebody before me that did she work for Conrad and Gargan at one stage?
Paquita Day.
Paquita Day,
yeah.
That's right. Yeah. That she was certainly before me. There were a couple in our class. There was and there was May Watson, and there was another lady that May Watson came in at. And I don't know what happened to these people, but she wasn't in my class all the time. But she was appeared somewhere along. Because I missed a year, because I did a year matriculation. There were a couple of different groups, but the the lecturers were Charlie Fulton, of course, was principal of the Central Technical College, and he was a very good man, I think, very good teacher, and all of those teachers there were all working as architects too, so they were not full-time academics or lecturers. They were all working as architects, and then so he would be principal, and I can't remember, we had so many. there was Athol Bretnell and Cole Jessup. Now, very early in the piece, they were involved, and as I say, that's where I went to work, and in a way those things tied together. There were people, Jack Gilmore. Now, Jack Gilmore was also with Fulton Collin, and believe it or not, right at the end was James Birrell. We had all these people coming, and there were lots, because there were lots coming and going. Now, he was in my final year here, which was about the time this building was built here, this staff building. He was the design lecturer. And then there were all sorts of... There was another lecturer here who was a full-time lecturer, and I remember him well, but I can't remember his name. Very good person.
Bruce Lucas, or...
I remember Bruce Lucas. But I just can't... He was a real stable influence on all the students, and it might come.
That was Robert Cummings, who was the...
No, I never had Robert Cummings. He was the professor here, wasn't he, Robert Cummings? But anyway, it might come. But, so there were so many of them, and so many different subjects. I couldn't even remember the subjects that I'd done when I was studying.
Bill Carr or Garth Roberts? Garth Roberts, Bill Carr.
Kyle.
Stan Marcus Carr.
Stan Marcus Carr.
Yeah.
He actually had a stroke, I think, at some stage. Might have been just after we finished, but I'm glad we remembered his name, because he was very, very good for the students. And and the very stabilising influence on students when they became upset, and he would help them, and so that was Stan.
Do you remember the courses that you were taught? You mentioned the design course.
I was trying to think of all these subjects there were, but there was primarily the design, which I think took over the time between having to keep all these deadlines up all night, trying to do all of this stuff, get it in on time, doing esquisses, having critiques, doing the final stuff, having them criticised, and the moment you'd finish that, you'd be on to another one. So the design really took over, and I suppose that was, I was going to say, my main interest. I as it turned out, it probably did become my main interest. But the other subjects too, trying to remembering Cole Jessup teaching us that drafting and watercolour right at the beginning. Oh, excuse me a moment, I just need to... Sorry. But the design was there for the whole 6 years. The others came and went. We certainly, those early days of building construction, I knew nothing about building construction, but we used a book that, my goodness, it went back to the Ark. When I went to England, I discovered the methods that had been described in that book. The English bond and the Flemish bond, and things that were not used here anymore. But so there was that building construction. There was, and I remember the professional practice in the final year, which really, the things that were taught there, particularly with regard to contracts and things, really have stood by me in many ways since. But then, of course, so there was really the design, but I was working all the time too, so that practical experience very much went hand in hand. So all of those practical issues came in from the working experience. And maybe that's why those things don't, in my memory, have as much importance as the design, which took the time, and then all of these other things coming in as other issues.
So you started with Blige at Riddel.
Yes, I did.
What stage were you at that when you
I
started?
think I
with
must
them?
have been about second year then. Can't remember exactly. Probably about the middle of second year, something like that.
And do you remember others of the people who were that you studied with, who are now prominent?
I don't know. I remember John Walsh.
Right.
Ralph Powell. I haven't seen him since. I think it's Powell. He went up north.
Yes.
And I remember him quite well. But if I ran into them today, I haven't seen them for so long, then I'd remember them.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So I think, when you say prominent, how many prominent? There are lots and lots of good architects around. And prominent or not is... I haven't followed their careers probably in these later years.
Ones who I suppose are still known as architects.
Yes.
There are a lot of people who didn't go on to practice.
Yes.
Or left the country or
Yes.
sort of disappeared.
I suppose because as soon as I qualified, about a year later, I went overseas. And I was overseas for 4 years. And then I was back here for about 9 years before I changed and went into the ministry. And then I sort of have lost touch with a lot of them, except people like Graham Bly and John Voller. And every so often I run into somebody and we share a lot of memories. I ran into... I meet people who know people, Bob Gardner, Bernie Ryan, people like that I worked with at Blige, and all the memories start flooding back. But
Well, I was at Blige, but it didn't coincide with you being there.
No.
I was in 1969.
Yes.
And you must have been, I think, away
Mm.
in UK till 69.
Yes. Yes, something
And
like
then
that.
you're in the US.
Yes, that's right. Yes. People like Roger Carash and worked at Blige at Bracknell too. He was a student when I was there. And I've seen him around lately, but would never have recognised him.
And were there many other women architects working at Blige?
No, there weren't any others. So they were very brave, actually, really quite remarkable to have taken me on. When there were some other architects who would not have taken a woman. Full stop. That was the way that it was, and but they did, and that was remarkable that they did in those days. Really, today it wouldn't be, but that really was quite remarkable then, because there were. I remember one person who was also a lecturer at the college who came and said to me, "We would like to take you on, but I would never take a woman." That's the way it was.
And
Yes.
the other women that studied with you?
I don't know. I completely lost touch with her.
Okay, but also they didn't go into practice at the time, or you
I don't remember. Don't remember.
Okay.
I think the one I went right through got married, and again, you see, it was a whole different time. Whole different time.
There was a Margaret Kerr I've seen.
No, that's not the person I remember.
That wasn't her.
Ethel somebody. Ethel?
Okay, I don't know that one.
No, I think I'd remember. It's a long time ago.
So did you do a thesis?
No.
You didn't have to in those days.
No. No, we didn't have to. We had to do that dreadful 3-day exam at the end of the time. I don't know whether there's still that 3-day exam now.
Ethel Young?
Ethel Young, yes,
Yes.
that's right, Ethel Young. And I don't know what happened to Ethel.
I don't know, I just have a list of
Yes, that's
women
who it
who
was.
registered as architects.
And
she's in
you
the
see, Ethel also had not matriculated
Mhm.
and had to stop for that year to matriculate as well.
Okay.
That's why she was sort of there, whereas I think May Watson was only there for half of the time that I was studying. She went through, but Ethel Young,
Mhm.
thank you for that.
No worries. Sorry, I interrupted.
Well,
That's all right.
I see here that you've worked for Ronald Percy as
I
well.
did. That's right,
And that's a name that
yeah.
I struggle to remember. I remember he was, I think, had an office at Indooroopilly when I knew him, but maybe...
Ron had an office in his home out at Clayfield, and that's when I was there. And then he had an office in the building in Upper Edward Street, the building that the Queensland Art Society was down in the basement of. He had an office there for a time. And I don't know, I haven't had any contact with Ron for quite a long time.
And how many people were in the office?
Only me.
Just you.
Ron and me. And see, this is the interesting thing, I think. I don't know about how offices are today, but then certainly at Bly Jessup there was small and large work, and you did various things there. With Ron, it was residential work, and you did the lot. You did everything. And of course, this is an interesting thing about Australia and being overseas. When you go over there, they say, what do you specialise in? And they find you can do everything. Or you may not be able to do everything. But, you know, just because a building is a great big building doesn't mean you have more expertise than the small building. Because you may even need more expertise for the smaller one, because you don't have all of the engineers and others helping you, and so you can work through everything. Whereas on the bigger building, you might be stuck on one little bit of it for a year. So with Ron, it was residential work, and then I went to Goodson Carlisle, Goodson Baker and Wild. It was then. And did a variety of work with them, of hospital work.
And they were in Swan Road? Or?
They were in Swan Road.
And do you remember the project that you worked on at Bly Jessup before you left to the UK?
Bly Jessup did a variety, and you know what I did, I don't know about before I left, but see, I came back there. I came back to Bly Jessup and was there for 9 years. When so I'm trying to remember particularly the student time that I was there.
The Supreme Court building?
I did. Was I a student then? Or was that after I came back?
I think that was...
After you came back, it would have been.
Yeah. See, I've got one of the things I remember when I was a student was the St Lucia Church of England. That was one of the ones that I was a student. There were some government works too. I can remember more the ones after I had returned. But certainly Church of England and St Lucia, that took up quite a time.
And when you were studying, did you also look at what international architects were doing? Did you study magazines? Or?
No, I think, as I say, I think we looked a great deal to international architects.
Do you remember who?
Well, you know, always and ever, and dare I say, Frank Lloyd Wright, always, you know, and we've got this building here that James Birrell has done that is based on a Frank Lloyd Wright idea of circles joined together. So always Frank Lloyd Wright, you know, and absolutely love Frank Lloyd Wright, you know, and at the other end, Mies van der Rohe and Alvar Aalto, who are really very different from, and I would be thinking more of Frank Lloyd Wright's earlier work, you know, the romantic sort of stuff, but then Mies van der Rohe and the precision of that work, and Alvar Aalto, the beauty but the precision too, you know. So certainly looking to that, but then also looking to England, which we did, you know. That was Dennis Lasdon and the University of East Anglia, that sort of stuff, and there was a lot of fairly brutal stuff around at that time, you know, often concrete, and which, you know, having lived in England for a while, some of it's beautiful, some of it's terrible.
And some of it doesn't age very nicely in that climate.
No, that's right. That's right.
Might be very different in a different climate.
It may be. But a lot of that was going on, you know, on the South Bank development happening there, a lot of that. So all of this was more so than, I think, looking more to those than Queensland, as I say, in the south, looking to architects in the south who were trying to develop an Australian style.
Do you remember who they were?
Ken Woolley, who else? Philip Cox. And that was a semi-residential style, brick and timber, that sort of thing. So all of that was going on. And then here, there were people, and this isn't answering your question, I don't think, but there was Robin Gibson, and I have always loved Robin Gibson's work. And then on the domestic side, John Dalton, Hazen Scott. So that was the sort of the mix of what we were looking at.
Okay. So you went abroad. You went to the UK.
I did, yes.
You went to Maxwell Fry's office.
I did, and Jane Drew.
Yeah.
You see.
And how did you end up there? Did you have connections there?
No.
Why did you decide to
I just
go?
got on a boat.
Oh.
You see, that was again what we did. Yes, got on a boat, went over, and applied for a job.
But you knew these people before you went? I mean, you knew of them, rather?
I knew of them. And I went there, I think, because there was the name of a woman, you know, Maxwell Fry and Jane Drew. And so I thought I'll go and work for them.
They employ women.
What's that?
They must employ women.
They must employ women. It's funny though, see, once I started, I didn't ever really find there was a barrier there. It was getting that start, or if there was, I didn't notice it.
Okay.
So it never really came up again. It came up, you know, in funny sort of ways, but not as far as getting work was concerned or anything like that. It didn't, or I didn't, as I say, I didn't notice it. And there were no other women in the office there, but you know.
But they hired you.
They did, and
immediately.
I was only there for about a year, I think, and because that I didn't expect to be leaving after a year, but that turned out to be the way people were working there in those days. You'd sort of, you'd work for a year, then you'd go off to the continent and trip around for a couple of months and come back and get another job and do the same and get another one. It seemed to be the way it
And that
went.
was sort of an education.
Oh, it was.
And were the particular buildings you wanted to see?
Yes, I think that I was able to sort of to see some of that work, some of Alvar Aalto's work.
So you went to Finland?
I did, yes. Yeah.
One of your trips?
Yes. So yes, and trip around and see the new and the old, and of course in England see some of this the new work too. Discover that certainly the greats are there, but other than that they're no better than Australia. You know.
Well, the difference is there's a lot more money to be spent there.
Yes, and but they're very. When I went to Maxwell Fry and Jane Drew's office, and their office was in a sort of 3-storey house in Baker Street. The section where I was, there was another Australian from Brisbane.
Do you remember who?
Miller.
Garble Miller?
No, his brother.
Oh.
His younger brother. He was there. There was an English fellow. There was me. That might have been all that was in the room, but certainly when I went to to Ralph Tubbs, there's an Indian, a Greek, a New Zealander, an Australian. You know, you go to work with English people and you find you're working with everybody else.
But I think it was Graham Blythe that also worked for Fry and...
He might have.
That was
Could well have.
before you?
Oh, it would have been before me. Yes, that would have been before me.
But he didn't in any way recommend you when you were at...
No. I don't think so.
Coincidence.
I don't think so. It was remarkably easy to get work, and they liked having Australians.
Because they were good value.
They were good value because, as I said before, we could sit down and do the working drawing. You know, we had the experience in all fields, and
we had a different attitude as well.
Yeah.
I think to working.
And it may have been the time that there was no shortage of work. I don't know, but I don't remember having to knock on doors for a long time to get a job. I went from there to Owen Luder because I'd seen he was doing this rough concrete stuff, and I thought I'd go there, and I got the job there. So it wasn't difficult.
And do you remember some of the projects that you worked on while you were there?
At Maxwell Fry,
Or the offices in
I was working on some housing primarily at Hatfield, and so that was good. They were Owen Luder's. I think it was a car park or something. And then at Ralph Tubbs, I worked the whole time I was there on Charing Cross Hospital. So
well, in present days, I mean, you're not going to get a hospital to design unless you've done a lot of hospitals.
that's right. Yeah.
And it wasn't quite like that then, I suspect, that you could take on any kind of job without having done one if you could convince them that you were a good architect.
Well, I was working in a firm with a number of people under others who did have the knowledge. So there was a sense in which it wasn't important whether or not I knew a great deal about hospitals, I don't think.
No, but your employers, I met.
Oh, yes, yes.
I mean, people seem to be able to get a very wide spectrum of work.
Yes.
Without really having the runs on the board. Yes.
Yeah. It was a whole different time, I think. It was this transitional time between general practice and specialisation, possibly. I don't know too much about it since, but it was the days before project managers. Project managers just came in at the end of my time. So it was a whole transitional time, I think.
And from there, you went to the US? Or
I
did you
did.
decide to...
I just thought I'd like to go there and work for a while. So I thought I'll go there and I'll go to New York City. If I'm going there, I may as well go to the biggest place and the biggest office. Not the biggest office, but the one I knew most about. So I went to Skid Row and Merrill and got a job.
Were there other women there?
There were other women there. Of course, it was a huge office. And I really loved working there. I hated New York.
Oh.
You know, as a city. It always reminded me, it was so dirty and dusty, I always thought that I was at the Brisbane exhibition in August with paper and dust everywhere. But I loved working there, and they were very, very good to me. Again, here I was, this Australian who was able to fit in and do a job, and I was in their working drawing section. They had various sections. I think I probably would have quite liked to be in the design section, but there was a lot of interaction between the two, and they treated me with a great deal of respect. That would be the way that I would put it, and offered me a job before I came home, but I was coming home. But that was interesting. That's interesting in a place that size. But again, I think as Australians, we were able to, we were used to doing all kinds of things and checking shop drawings and also all of that we had done.
Mm.
And do you remember the projects that were going on at SOM at that time?
Yes, 70-storey office buildings.
Okay.
So they were, primarily multi-storey buildings.
Yeah.
In New York.
In New York.
Mm.
Yes.
Yes.
And then you decided to come back to Australia.
I came back to Australia.
What made you come back? You got a job offer.
I was
here?
always going to come back.
Okay.
That was always the plan.
Mm.
So I came back.
And then you applied for a job at Jessup.
Bly Jessup. So I went back there.
Mm.
Back to the old roost.
And in Upper Edward Street?
In Upper Edward Street, that's right, yes. That was before the new building was built. Before we were over the car park. So we were in that front build, I think. Oh, I don't know. No, maybe that was before. You see, all the time I was there before Mingles. No, we were over the car park then. Because we'd always been in that front building. Then we moved out of there, built the car park, and on top of the car park came back.
So it says here, Mermaid Waters Townhouse Development Documentation. Now, do you remember that?
Oh, vaguely I remember. Mermaid Water, oh, vaguely remember that. I don't think that was built, was it?
I don't know, but
No.
I can remember doing a scheme for some townhouses while I was at Bly's in the year before, and there were only about maybe four attached houses, but four of them, they were somewhere near Broadbeach, but I don't remember exactly where.
This again, you see, was the time when attached housing was all being developed. I vaguely remember that. I don't remember it as well as some of the other things, though.
Do you think it was built?
No, I don't think so. I might get into trouble for some of these memories. No, I don't
We
think
won't
so.
tell.
Well, I don't know about that.
And it was at the time that you worked on the Supreme Court building as well.
Worked on the Supreme Court building. And again, you see, with those, it was as part of a team, because Bly Jessup had teams, so I certainly worked on a number of things with them as part of a team. The Supreme Court building, Watkins Place, Gatton College buildings, and then there were others that probably I was more involved in, from design through to supervision stage. The Runaway Bay Shopping Centre, which is the one that everybody seems to remember. The first stage of that, a retirement village at Harvey Bay, and Kayanga. There's a hall at Kayanga, Memorial Hall at Kayanga after the mine disaster, and those were things that I was involved in every stage. And I was involved quite a lot in the design with Graham in the design of buildings, but then those others I sort of was all the way through. Was involved with him on our entry to the Queensland Art Gallery. We were on the shortlist for that, and so I was involved with him on that. You might have some others. You can tell me what I did.
I can remember some competitions. I think they were competitions. One for Toowoomba Town Centre that was done at that time, that they actually won, but I don't think it ever got.
No, I don't think that was when I was there.
And Moorlands, they were doing the development of the Moorlands site.
Yeah.
When it wasn't a hospital, it was to be housing.
Yes.
And I don't think, well, that obviously didn't go ahead because the
No.
hospital didn't.
No, there was a lot of that was happening. See, the MLC building in the city, I might have had a very minor. I didn't do too much. I did more of Watkins Place than that. I don't know. Did I remember anything else? No, they were the main ones.
Did you find your experience abroad useful for coming back? Were there things that you...
Yes, I would have to say yes. I would have to say yes, in that I believe all of that broadens your experience. I didn't, not consciously a great deal, but I think all of your experiences come into the things that you do, make you the person that you are, and come into what you do. So, and travelling abroad and seeing the layout of towns and squares, and that's right. That was another thing that we looked at, the building behind the City Hall when all of that was being developed. We did some work. I don't think we ever did the building work, but we were looking at that.
Well, what became the administration building was
Yes.
done by Conrad Gargett,
I think so, probably,
and
yes. That was sort of all open at one stage too. Yeah.
Which buildings that in this period that we're talking about, 45 to 75, which ones do you think are worthy of note?
Here, I would say the Queensland Art Gallery. I love the Queensland Art Gallery every time I go into it. And so
It's the first of
the whole of the South Bank.
perhaps 5 of those buildings that Gibson did
yes. And I think it's certainly stood the test of time, and I think it's a beautiful.
Probably, it is. I agree with you.
Yeah. I think, and I've been out of touch, for so long. I put a few down here. I don't know whether. Another building that comes to mind is the Lutheran Church in Wickham Terrace.
Barry Waldo.
That's who it was, yes. Now, I think that's an excellent building too.
It's going to be open next Saturday as part of Open House, apparently.
Oh, is it really? Yeah. I think it's. I think it's a good building. I think the Supreme Court building too that we worked on is.
And the District Court, was that
the District Court?
It?
Yes. I was involved in that
They're
too.
quite different.
Very different
buildings.
Very different.
So what do you think of their relative merits to each other? I mean, the whole site's coming up for
Yes.
a new use or demolition.
Yes,
I don't know which.
I know. I think they are very different, and probably just as well the Supreme Court didn't follow the style of the district court. They're very different, and maybe that was the time and the people. Yeah, but I'm be very saddened to see the whole lot go, I must admit.
Yeah,
And,
it's, I mean, another one that is talked about disappearing would be the Executive Building in George Street.
Yes, I heard that the other night, and I don't know that I'm too worried about that. The other ones, and somebody told me that one of Jim Burrell's libraries is on the list, never to be destroyed. Is that right? I think his couple of libraries are very good.
Well, the Toowong Library
Toowong.
certainly protected, as is the one at Annerley.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So I think his buildings, and of course some of the houses of John Dalton, Hayes and Scott. I think that was a real development of Queensland style, and I'm going to throw another one in, and I don't know what the future of the La Boite Theatre is.
Yes, by Wilson Architects.
Yeah. That's a very sensitive sort of little building, isn't it?
Blair Wilson's.
And Blair Wilson, and again you see the difficulty there. The setting and the whole thing makes it difficult, but beautiful little building.
And brick.
Yeah, the brickwork is just magnificent, isn't it?
But that wasn't common for the period to use that much brick in Queensland architecture, or was it?
Not that colour.
I think not that colour, but brickwork was certainly very much in use. I mean, you think of all these institutional buildings, PA Hospital.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
The colleges on this campus.
Yes.
They're all brick.
But not for residential.
Well, the sort of the brick veneer residential stuff sort of. I think it's a shame though that there's not more brick being used today in residential work. I have to say that, because I think it's a soft material, natural material that the landscape fits around.
So do you think working in that period that some Queensland style emerged? Because of course there was modern architecture coming in about everywhere, which was quite international. Do you think that in Australia and Queensland you were able to give it a typical Queensland?
I think it is. There's some of it now. I'm sorry though to see that the Ken Woolley style with brick and timber seems to have gone. I would have, in residential stuff more, I would like to have seen that developed more than the kind of residential building, and I don't even know whether they're architect design, they may not be, than some of the stuff I see today. Some of it's good, it's got a Queensland character, some of it doesn't seem to have much character at all.
I think it was Ronald Percy's house. No, it was another architect who did a house that I remember very well in Graceful.
Right.
Which impressed me, which was concrete block.
Yes.
Just, unfinished concrete block inside and out.
Yes.
And glass and with wood frames.
Yeah.
I can't think who that was now.
No, well, I as I say, I'm out of touch. I went to, was it the State Library had an exhibition of houses, and there was some lovely stuff in there. Yeah. Now, when you get to that level of design, there is some beautiful work around. But when you come to the less expensive houses that are around, there's just not much character in a lot of them, and that's often been the case, and I'm a bit disappointed about that.
John Railton was somebody who impressed me as a student.
That's right, yes.
And he only did probably
Yes.
half a dozen houses,
Yes.
but they were all interesting and they all cost very little.
Yes.
And they were all clever.
Yes. Yeah.
And there was this idea about how much you could do for so little,
Yes.
and yet get some architecture into it.
Have very many people achieved that?
No.
No.
I mean, John Dalton gets recognised, but he's essentially did the same sort of house, or at least the same section, over and over.
That's right. That's right.
And
that's right.
when he came to do bigger things, I don't think they were nearly as
No. That's that whole financial sort of thing has always been a problem for architects here. Who can afford to employ an architect? And then all the constraints you have when you haven't got the finance, when you're just cutting back, it makes it very difficult.
So did you ever build your own house?
No.
Did you want to?
No. I think, and because I lived in a little unit that Graham de Grucci had in Toulon there for a while, but no, I think I would drive myself mad if I was in something I'd designed myself. And then, circumstances of the way I've lived have meant that I've sort of lived in all sorts of odd places, manses and. But no, I don't think I could bear to live in a place that I design myself. I do some watercolour painting now, and I don't have my paintings up on my wall because I'd keep looking at them to see what was wrong.
What you could improve, yeah. And why did you decide to retire from architecture? Were you fed up with architecture? Or you just wanted to...
I loved being an architect, and I still, as I say, I love buildings. I love buildings, and I loved being an architect. But I believed I should become a minister in the church. That's the only answer I can give, really.
So it was nothing to do with architecture?
No, it was nothing.
No
nothing that was wrong. No, it wasn't. No,
okay.
No, it wasn't. So, so that's the way it went.
Okay. Don't know.
What about teaching? I mean, you knew so much.
I couldn't bear to teach. I couldn't bear to teach. In all areas, I would be no good as a teacher. No good as a teacher at all. And joining the two, and it's interesting, one of the things in the church that I became interested in was liturgy. Now, I then did an essay at one stage on liturgy and architecture because they really do fit very much together, and the whole belief system behind what's happening. For instance, I think again Robin Gibson did a very good job with St Stephen's Cathedral, and the way he has done certain things there that make the sanctuary area and the congregation come together as one is really quite interesting, because there's been with liturgy and Vatican II, there was a whole change from the old idea of you have the clergy up there with a screen between and the people not joined, not part of the the congregation, just looking through this little screen. Now he's completely changed that in St Stephen's Cathedral by bringing the altar down, having an ambo instead of a pulpit, and then that magic of the Lady Chapel behind with that baptismal font that can be seen from the congregation, which is really quite non-traditional to have a baptismal font there. He's done things that are theologically sound and liturgically sound in that cathedral, and I think done them well. So I became interested in that sort of thing, and I'm still interested in that.
That's what was made possible by the Second Vatican Council.
That's
the whole
right.
change of
Exactly
Vatican
right.
writing.
That's right.
Did you ever visit La Tourette, or because it's also by
No.
Le Corbusier?
No, I haven't. No.
It's also a very different type of monastery than
Yes.
what you were used to.
Well, yeah, and see, while I was still an architect, I was interested in some. Well, I went to Liverpool Cathedral, for instance. Now, Liverpool Cathedral has the altar right in the middle. So this was all going on. This incorporating the congregation and the clergy together. So that was all going on. So I became very interested in that from when I was an architect through into the ministry. Yeah.
It's interesting.
So there is a real connection there.
Yeah.
I guess Robin Gibson was criticised for some of the things that he did in St Stephen's from, I suppose you'd say, the heritage protection direction, and that was to do with the philosophy of dealing with old buildings was to respect them for what they are, and if you need to change them, you do that in a very respectful way, whereas what he did was quite he was able to change the church at whim, really, it seemed, to suit his
but I think,
desire to implement these things. You could have done it in a softer way, and I just wonder how this whole business of respecting the past and yet changing the use is a tricky one, and
it's a very tricky one, and I haven't heard the criticism or the debate, so I can speak freely from my own point of view. But I think it's a very, very tricky one, particularly with ecclesiastical buildings and heritage listed, and you move a baptismal font in a heritage listed building, and you'll get into trouble. I think the blend of old and new is just so beautiful anyway, and a lot of very old buildings. You go to some old castles and things that have become museums, and the beauty of the old and the new is just absolutely magnificent if it's done well.
Well, doing it well is the tricky bit.
That's right.
Until people like Carlo Scarpa came along,
Yes.
I think he really showed the finesse that can be applied to that sort of thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's what's needed, and I suppose it's the same with everything, doing it well. I certainly would. I like what Robin Gibson's done there, but I've seen some other cathedrals that are almost newer that have been built in the Gothic style and added to in a Gothic style, which in my mind is just not honest, because it's held up with steel and all the rest, and I love the Gothic cathedral, absolutely love the Gothic cathedrals in England and Europe, but I also love the fact that in those are these little modern jewels that they are still continuing to do things, and
they weren't worried about the consistency if it started off in the 12th century and finished in the 16th century at the other end. No, they're quite different.
They're quite different, but today we sort of look at them and think this is beautiful. And from the point of view of the church, it's very important to reflect the rethinking, as you say, of Vatican II and the whole new liturgical movement. I believe it's important to do that, to have churches with... we don't have churches that where monks sit opposite each other and sing antiphonally now and with a screen. That we don't believe in that anymore. So how can you do that? How can you have, the cathedrals, the cathedrals in England are all changing to bring their altars down into the nave, and they still have the high altar, but they've all done what has happened.
And yet I can't think of one, but there's probably is one, an example where they've kept the rood screen in place and moved the altar to the western end of it.
There probably is, but I can't think of any either. I know a lot of them have and what they've done is exactly what is in St Stephen's. They've moved, for instance, Norwich Cathedral, and there are others. They've moved the altar down into the nave, and the choir stalls are in a semicircle behind. Now, I think it can probably be taken out. I think it's probably all removable, I'm not sure, but that's what they're doing, and that's exactly what St Stephen's has. And so, but they still have the high altar there, and at times they move up and have that procession up to there.
It's still possible.
It's still possible, I think, yes. So.
Okay. I don't know if, because the other questions I think we already asked. I don't know if you have any further questions.
Well, I'm interested in people like Karl Langer. Did you come across him?
Yes, well, I knew of him. I don't think he was up there on the terrace.
He taught here, though.
Yeah, I don't think I ever had him. He taught town planning, didn't he? Yes.
Yes, and landscape, I think.
Yeah, I did a bit of, I knew of him and knew his reputation. He was certainly one of the important people that were around in that time and probably a bit before me. I did a bit of landscape architecture with Bernie Ryan.
Well, Barry Walduck we mentioned, and Barry worked for Karl Langer.
That's right, up on the terrace, didn't he? Yes. And that's that Lutheran connection through there, isn't it?
And then you mentioned Barry's church on Wickham Terrace, but Karl Langer's last church was at St Peter's. Have you seen that one?
I have. I've been in that one. Yes.
Now that's quite a very different sort of an exercise in how you place a church even.
Yes.
I mean, it's done in it's almost a Greek idea of a modern temple front.
It is, isn't it? I can't. Last time I was there, it was at night time, and but it is. You come in. There's a sort of a colonnade sort of thing outside, isn't there? Outside. But Karl Langer did that church on the way to Toowoomba somewhere, didn't he? Too, and that was really very Germanic, I think, probably, and had a lot of attention, but not very Australian, I wouldn't have thought.
Well, I mean, I don't know that you'd say that Barry Walduck's church is Australian either.
No.
It's much more French, I suppose.
Yeah, it comes to mind as I think just the beautiful brickwork, and it's fairly simple inside, and in a very difficult situation because of what we spoke of before, of how do you build an ecclesiastical building in the city close to the cathedral and close to All Saints, and do you try to fit in? Well, it doesn't particularly, but it's just a simple statement of a church there.
And there were a couple of other buildings around it which have been altered very drastically, which were part of that group.
Yes,
And,
Yes, that's right.
They were carefully
The
done
offices,
too.
the little office block there was, I worked in there for a time,
Oh.
and that was a good little building.
But I mean, that idea about respecting what people do, and you know, all buildings get changed over
Yes.
time and they need
Yes.
repairs, but you can do it in a way that really destroys the qualities that they had, and
Yes.
that's what
Yes.
has happened there.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Well, you see, we're in an age where buildings are put up and pulled down in a space of 25 years or something like that. I don't know what it is now, but
I think,
not too many last all that long.
I think though that's changing, and
Is it?
this whole idea of what the value of the energy, the embodied energy that it takes to build something,
Yes,
that you get more out of it than
Yes.
that. You know,
yes,
you don't pull it down,
No.
you adapt it,
yes,
and you do what is needed to make it survive.
Yeah.
But if you can do that without wiping out its quality, its design quality at the same time, then that's
doesn't
Even
happen
better.
very often, does it?
no,
No.
it doesn't.
No. And
And even at a domestic
well-
level, it doesn't happen.
well, maybe that's something that we need to concentrate on. Overseas, that there are people specialising in doing that now. Of course, the buildings are a lot older. The historic buildings are a lot older. Here, we haven't had the respect for buildings that would probably, and I might be quite wrong, but the respect, everybody is able to do it other than an architect. And so you can, here the thing is just get the builder in and give you a bit of a plan and they will do it.
As fast and as cheap as possible.
As fast and as cheap as possible. Now that doesn't allow what you've suggested to happen, except in very unusual circumstances.
I'm just interested, there was another building that I think you might have known about, which was the little private chapel built for the Archbishop in Hamilton,
No, I don't.
and it's a very Frank Lloyd Wright building,
Oh, right.
designed by Graham Thiedeke, who was working at Conrad and Garget.
Is that up on the top of the
Yes.
hill up there? I've only seen it from a distance and said, what's that? I must go and look at it now.
Well, it's
Yeah.
no longer a chapel, it's because it's no longer the Archbishop's
Archbishop's
residence,
house.
so I'm not sure what they use it for, but
Yeah. I must
it's,
go and look anyway.
it was a very strange little
Yeah.
building,
Yeah.
and I'd be interested to know what you think when you
Yes.
have a look.
Yes.
Just a minute ago, you said about a church that was not very Australian, but then I think there was something implicit going on between you two. But what would you say? Why would you say it's not very Australian?
I think saying maybe it was European.
That
or
was
European.
the St. Peter's.
Yes.
Oh, St. Peter's.
Lutheran.
But
Yes,
what would you say?
I can't remember. I have been there, but I can't remember enough about it. I have to admit.
Well, it's quite
to know that.
theatrical. I mean, it's a fan-shaped plan, and
Yeah. And
the
I know
seating,
seating goes
the
down, doesn't it?
ceiling becomes part of the
Right.
wall behind
Right.
the altar.
Yeah, I can't remember enough
And
about
you
it.
also go down into it. It's like
You
going
do go down
a-
into it.
an
I remember you go
amphitheatre.
down into it.
Mm.
Yeah, and
And it's shaped like an amphitheatre.
yes.
But the front is very prominent. I mean, the west front.
Mhm.
It has this space in front of it, and he did buildings either side of
Mm.
it as well. So it has this
Mm.
formality about it that he seemed to like, because his town hall in Kingaroy is exactly the
Is
same.
it? Is it?
And yet
Well, it's
not-
part of the campus, isn't it? Part of that.
Yes.
So very much part of that. Look, I can't remember enough to comment.
It's okay. I was just wondering.
comment what the-
Okay. I don't have any more questions.
I guess
maybe?
we've done the time, haven't we?
Yes,
done
yes.
the time.
We've been over an hour.
We
Unless you
could
want
keep talking
We've
all
done
the
the time.
the whole day.
Unless you
Done
want
the
to still add
No.
something for the tape, then I
No.
that's done. Thank you for talking
That's
to
all
us.
right.